is that you're not allowed to hold court on Shabbos. There are two kinds of what they did. The first thing that deals with life, matters of life and death, takes up crimes for which the penalty is death, and then there are penalties of money, or matters of money. The first din and moments. In both cases, there cannot be any court held on Shabbos. The reason why even din and moments itself, simple money matters, cannot be held on Shabbos, means that either a litigation between two people, two parties, where both present their claims, or the question of somebody committed a crime, monetary crime. In both cases, there can be no court held because of the Zeta. Possibly they might write down their decisions. Judges might write down the decisions, or they might write the claims of each party. They remember all the claims to base their judgment on. Because of that Zeta, they might write, which is the Chilul Shabbos. Therefore, there's no court, no din held on Shabbos. Also, not only that, but the case where Yadenu Kifa, where Jews have their own land, they have their own courts, they have their own judgment, they carry out the judgment, even, let's say, giving a death penalty. They have their own prisons. So it's forbidden to capture a criminal. Capture a criminal, put him into prison. This is forbidden. Even though a person deserves being put into prison for some crime he committed, on Shabbos, this Rasha, this sinner, is not to be touched. Why? Because just as we find that Gehenna, the Rishonim are released on Shabbos, so too, on earth, the Rishonim not to be put to Tfisa in prison on Shabbos. We do not release those that are in prison already. That's not up to us to do. At least we're not supposed to imprison a person on Shabbos. If there's one that's the best, most wanted list, and see him on Shabbos, if they don't grab him now, they don't capture him, he'll escape again. You're allowed to take him. The answer is you're not allowed to. And why? Because that's the din. We, as judges, as court, have done what we're required to do. Just as the mitzvah is during the week to capture him, put him in prison, so the mitzvah also, on Shabbos, the mitzvah is to not be captured. This is our duty. Hashem wants to place him in jeopardy, the position to be caught after Shabbos is over. Our duty is not to capture this person, this criminal, on Shabbos. One case, though, where you're allowed to capture a person on Shabbos to imprison him, that's where there might be damage to others. If, let's say, this is a man who's a long-suffering individual, he never has a wife who torments him, makes his life bitter, and he's reached the point of intolerance. He doesn't want to tolerate this, he wants to escape, he wants to flee. He intends to join a foreign legion, which will go off in some far corner of the earth, which we wouldn't mind, except for the fact that his wife will be left in Aguna. He left a living widow. I mean, she cannot remarry because her husband is still alive somewhere, and she's not divorced. She has no husband either. She'll have no husband and no chance for remarriage. That's called Aguna. This we must prevent. In a case like that, we have to catch this hapless man, hold him, detain him, continue on his miserable way, so that his wife should remarry. Of course, there are other cases. This works both ways. It could be a case where the wife is a tzadikis and she has a husband who is a wrong type, very evil type, who does her harm and goes off to different cities to gallivant while his wife suffers here. There too, we see to it that he cannot leave. So in that case only, it is then permissible to imprison this person on Shabbos, see that he cannot get out of town. If in case of Malchus, or a case where they have to give Malchus to give lashes to one who has committed sins, this too is not done on Shabbos. In addition to the fact, of course, that the Malchus is a second Zeta. Zeta that he might make a chavruta on Shabbos, which means to make a wound swelling, blood rises to the surface, blood leaves, that is really one of the major malachos on Shabbos. But for that, there's no din of malachos on Shabbos. In other words, on Shabbos, there was a Yom Menucha, day of rest for everyone, which was to its true Yom Menucha, also Levai, and Rav Nosson, the sinful of Yis, but on Shabbos, it is that on Shabbos, we said there was no din allowed, judgment, court cases, and so forth. The thing, of course, is harsh judgments. The reason was because maybe he would write down the court decision, and write down the claims of each litigant. The same token, not allowed to, in the Kaddish, Kiddushin is also. Kiddushin, Chassidut and Kala, is also. But maybe they would write the marriage contract. This, of course, too, is din. Boy, that's no one's getting into it. So, Kiddushin is also because of the fact that they may forget and write. Because of that Gzeda, therefore, the whole Kiddushin is also. A Kiddushin, you have to keep in mind, is not what people think it is. Kiddushin is not marriage. Especially legally, with Kiddushin, Kaddish Isha, she's not married. This is like a term of betrothed. She's engaged, bound. She's Kaddish, she's holy, meaning to anybody else, she's now like Kagish. It's ineffable, untouchable, unapproachable. She belongs to this one. But she is not yet married yet. What is missing? There must be a kinyan where he actually gains possession. The man gains possession of his wife through a kinyan. What completes the kinyan is the chuppah. But the main part of the wedding is that chuppah. Of course, today it's not the chuppah alone. Today the kinyan is still consummated through the yichud that comes after the chuppah. The chassan probably go to the yichud room, and then there the yichud room is closed. Being there alone together is what completes the kinyan. And of course, there are some weddings where they're unaware of this. They forget the chuppah is wild, the excitement, so they forget. They go right to the cameras, to the photographers, take pictures, and they forget about yichud, which is the main part of the wedding. They're not married to that for the yichud. But since Al-Pi Din, actually chuppah itself made for the second kinyan, therefore, so not just Kiddushin is us, but even if the Kiddushin did take place on Friday, before Shabbos began, they have Kedeshus, they still cannot complete the wedding under the chuppah, because the chuppah is the kinyan. You cannot make a kinyan on Shabbos, like business, not so much. This is what the din says. Now, I must say that what happened if Biddy Evan made a wedding on Friday afternoon, but it was dragged out. Sometimes it's very difficult to complete an item because of the fact that there are so many different details to be taken care of at the wedding. As much as they rush, they couldn't get it done in time before Shabbos. So it was dragged down into Shabbos itself. Is it permissible to complete it? So to make the chuppah, or even the kiddushin and chuppah, if the preparations for it were not completed on Friday. The entire thing wasn't completed on Friday. Paul says that for the Evid, because of the embarrassment to the chassan and kala, to be embarrassed. Here they got the whole wedding prepared, the caterer is there, all the food is on the table, everything is ready, the musicians are playing, and here you have musicians, of course, means goyim, because where there are goyim, it's permissible to have them play music on Shabbos, in case of a wedding. According to many halacha, no one celebrates that. So, of course, nowadays, by the way, we don't have weddings on Friday or on Shabbos. But formerly, the custom was to have weddings, especially on Friday, which would lead to Shabbos. And in fact, in Israel today, you have a lot of weddings take place Friday afternoon. If the wedding was prolonged and the ceremony did not take place until Friday night, Amos says you're allowed to have the ceremony on Friday night, that is the Kiddushin and the chuppah, because of embarrassment of the chassan kala. You see how the chachamim are so particular about the kavod habiyus, about a person's feelings. If they remove the Gzeda, you have a Gzeda, you cannot get married Friday because of the fact that you might write that you go to the Kenyan. They remove the Gzeda to say we respect the feelings of a Chassid Kala, and therefore it is permissible to complete the wedding on Friday night. This, of course, is only a stipulation, only if it's the first wedding. Not if it's a man going around with marriages left and right. The first wedding, which means he has not fulfilled the mitzvah yet, has no children yet, or in the case, let's say, he has very small children. His wife passed away, and he has to, he's the second wife to take care of these small children. Again, it's the same thing applies, according to the time. But according to the Amos, that this refers to a case where it's his first marriage, and it's a question of respect for a person's feelings. It is allowed to be done, be completed on Friday. Ordinarily, though, Din says that person, Latu says that the person should never allow it to get to that point. In the evidence, it's okay, but the person never allowed the wedding to reach Friday night, and therefore to avoid having weddings on Friday to that close to Shabbos. Because of the Easter of Shem Yichtoi, or because of Kidding. Which is therefore to a real wedding, Yichud, which is therefore Shmintai, coming in Shech Mehelam. Because Shabbos, the Nidders, just as it's also to marry on Shabbos, so is it also to have chalitza on Shabbos or Yibum. It means that if a woman's husband dies and she has no children, then the husband's brother either marries her, it's called Yibum, or he gives her chalitza, saying special ritual ceremony that serves as a gift, a divorce. Special form where she takes off his shoe, the entire procedure. Those things cannot be done on Shabbos. Just like you can give a get on Shabbos, you can marry on Shabbos, get to and no dinner plates on Shabbos. Because by Chalitza there's the Shashnik Zeta, perhaps they might write. Even writing is an Easter. Later, because of this, he said, so therefore there's no police at all. There's no evil either, because perhaps too they might write, start a contract. Plus the fact that evil is a kinyan. It requires, a woman is actually acquired by a husband when he gets married. She's his property. Same as buying anything else. Not that much value of anything else, but its purchase is there. The bit of kinyan is there. Kinyan is also on Shabbos. So in other words, this is the case of what is the Easter of writing, what is the Easter of kinyan. Actually, the same. Naso Natan, which means doing business, is also in general because it's a weekday item, but also because there's always a shash of writing. So therefore, any type of business is also very reason. Any type of transferring from one person to the second, one owner to the second, that's also the Shabbos. And we have therefore to the same dinner, the makdish. A person cannot declare an item hektish. It's a mitzvah. You say, I want to give my animal, declare this animal hektish. It's a cover to the Beis HaMikdash. Major mitzvah involved. And yet he cannot say those words, because by saying those words, mean about hektish, by saying just these words alone, this translate to hektish is the same as a regular kinyan. Moved from one possession, his possession, now becomes the possession of hektish. Goes out to one ishus to the second ishus, and therefore it is usher on Shabbos. However, it is stipulates very carefully that this does not mean thinking about hektish. It's not mean when you say, I want to give, when it's a state pledge to give $100 to tzedakah, to mean that the money becomes kiddush too. In this case, though, that is definitely mutter. Because you're not saying this $100 bill becomes tzedakah. You're saying, I take it upon myself to give to tzedakah a certain amount. There's no case of a kinyan involved, no case of a transfer involved. It is mutter, the mitzvah, Shabbos, even Gemara says to gather together, special conference, special convention, special meeting, raise money for tzedakah and important purposes. was big in this federation. Real stuff. Raising money for yeshivas, Israel especially. That may be done, and that's a mitzvah to do on Shabbos. Now the case of dinner, Truma, and Mesa. In Israel we have Truma and Mesa. Not eat the food until you take off Truma and Mesa from the which grows. So, as a person allowed to, he has food. You take off Truma and Mesa on Shabbos. This says he cannot. Then take off Truma and Mesa. Why not? Not that he's transferring something now. It's that he's taking an article that is incomplete, that is useless, and he's completing it. It's called Tikuney Zohar, Tikuney Zohar. It's not going to kill. Just as you take an article, a dish that's not usable, and you repair it. You perfect it where it could be used. This is also a Shabbos Tikuney Zohar. Here too, you're taking food which is effective, it cannot be eaten. You're repairing, affecting the food by taking it out through the Meiser, and this is also a Shabbos. However, if a person, let's say, did it in the Evan, despite the fact that it's also he did take off through the Meiser, then though the rest of the food is chulin, it cannot be eaten on Shabbos. Of course, he did it with Meiser, as he broke it in, he has to wait till Meiser Shabbos before he's allowed to eat that food. His act did not help him. However, if it was done to Shegeg, he simply forgot that it was Shabbos for a moment. Or he wasn't aware of the fact, there was a lack of knowledge of it, he wasn't aware of the fact that, because he forgot the fact that it was also at the moment. In other words, it was done to Shegeg. In this case, since it was done to Shegeg, we allow that food to be, in this case of Tikuney is a smaller than Tikuney, so if it was done already, Shegeg, there's no psul in the food itself, and he may eat it. Chila, of course, it's usher, and he's also done this on Shegeg. Perfect to Kayan, Mitzvah Shmina Shabbos, and then having the second bullet to affect ourselves. Therefore, the CBS goes on to that. Okay, Shabbos. We did a opinion of Ben, we've taken up already. Now that when a child is born, if he is the first-born son to the mother, not the father, that's the Echem, then there's a good opinion of Ben. The child is Kaddish, and must be redeemed, must be lifted through a Kayin. The father gives $5 silver at a time. This, he buys his son back, the third becomes his. This is an actual transaction. So, since the bid is that the opinion of Ben must take place when the child finishes 30 days old, then there's a opinion of Ben. Why not before 30 days? Because any child up to 30 days is a suffix chai. It's a doubt whether he will live. You're not sure that a child will live until he has gone through a period of 30 days. A good 30 days and he's a chazaka that he's going to live. Of course, it's possible before 30 days to it. It's positive, but we do not know. We're not sure of it. Therefore, you cannot redeem and you pray there Ben until he's positively a chai, which means 30 days. Now, what if the end of the 30 days, 31st day is on Shabbos? And the thing is, it cannot be prayed in advance. The thing is, the mitzvah is still business, transaction. So it's postponed through the 31st day. And of course, again, what is a transaction? It also clear. Then he might write down, she made the claim that only $5 and write it down, now it's $5 richer. After that, he might write, or the father might write down his house $5 and write it down with tears. For some people, it's that much of a pain. Now, because of this, there is no picking of Ben on Shabbos. It's postponed until after Shabbos. This means that on Tzoi Shabbos immediately the picking of Ben takes place. Not the way we refer to the mitzvah. All get what that mitzvah, not postpone the mitzvah at all, anytime. It is also that on Shabbos, there is no, of course, of the fact that there's no weddings too, there's also no gifting. No divorces can take place on Shabbos. Because it's there that he might write a shtar, a gerushin. Therefore, get on Shabbos is also give, the hand over a get, through which a woman becomes divorced. This is also on Shabbos. The only time that it's missed on Shabbos is to get shchibnida. Shchibnida means that a man is lying on a deathbed, and there it's a special mitzvah. Hurry, expedite the get, because I'm sorry for that, if she has no children, and he has a brother, this is going to require a whole difficult, complex procedure of chalitza. In order to avoid that, we want to get in, free her from chalitza. Even on Shabbos, Chachamim allowed the shchibnida to give the get to his wife. There's no postponing it. When he's healthy, you wait till the next day. And if there's a chance he might die then, they allow giving the get. And the evidence, if the person did hand over the gift, he was so anxious, he couldn't let the Shabbos over to get rid of his wife, he handed her the gift, then he can have a happy Shabbos. She's divorced. The evidence is done. The evidence shouldn't be done, but if it was done, enjoy it. The gift takes effect even on Shabbos. Shabbos, Shabbos. We already mentioned that as far as the wedding is concerned, on Shabbos it is Asr. Kedushin is also because perhaps he might write the contract, Shtad. Marriage is also because Chuppah is also because it's a kinyan. To make a kinyan on Shabbos is like business, doing business, which is also because of the Zayda of writing. Now there's a difference between one who marries a Vesula. Vesula means one who was never married before, who never had relations before in her life. And an Almana is one who was married, a widow, just as we find in Ksuba is different. Marriage contract calls for $100 for an Almana. Every woman, girl who gets married, has a Ksuba of $200 minimum. That's the minimum price that may have Ksuba. Anybody could make a tasteless Ksuba. He could add to the Ksuba, give more than the minimum requirement. Minimum is $200 for Ksuba, and $100 half the price for an Almana. He's not getting, he's getting a product that has already been used, not a perfect product. Therefore, it's $100. We said a tasteless Ksuba, person who, in some cases, they add to it to show people for the color, so they add extra amounts to the Ksuba. For example, among the Sfardim are afraid of Chamsas. The number 5 is a mysterious number. For some reason, they fear it. So in the Ksuba, they write down 4 times 5. Basic Ksuba, they have the regular Ksuba, they have each chassan, even if he's got 2 cents to his name, promises his color $5,555. This is a Sephardic custom, Syrian custom, and of course, I don't know how good their promises are, but it's as good as the Sephardic one. That's their custom, which does show us there is a din, Halacha, tasteless Ksuba. Now, we said the difference between a Almana and a Besula is not just in the Ksuba alone. The difference is in the kinyan. The kinyan, there are some who believe that the chuppah itself is kind of. Nowadays, we do not accept the chuppah, standing on the chuppah. This does not mean that the kinyan was consummated. She is not his wife yet. The real kinyan is the yichud that comes after the chuppah. After the chuppah is over, the chassan kala gadaf and the chuppah, they go into a special private room. They stay in that room for a few minutes. That is the yichud which completes the kinyan. She then becomes his wife. If he was not kind of this woman as his wife, then this yichud. Now, the din of Almana is different. by an almana, there are many who say that the almana is not officially his wife. It wasn't kind of her, no yichud through chuppah or through yichud alone. Except in some cases a certain kind of yichud that's enough for an almana. But many hold that the almana is nikna only through actual living together. So that in the case of an almana, this would mean that even if the wedding was completed on Friday, everything was done, the chuppah and the yichud, they still cannot live together on Friday night, because that would mean that the kinyan is being made on Shabbos. However, Halacha l'maisa, there are many who say that with a almana we can be mekil, because the difference would be in the yichud itself. This is a very important halacha, very vital and very timely. The shul says that this yichud means when they are absolutely alone. Only that is a kaina. So yichud is kaina always. What then is the difference between the sula and almana? That the yichud haroy l'biyah is kaina by almana. That means they must be completely enclosed privately in order for the yichud to be kaina by almana. And even the yichud which is not, the yichud which means that people walk in and out of the room by a psul, that too is enough to be kaina. It's a tremendous chiddush. Many who marvel at this, many who will not believe it when you tell it to them. So I found in the past. Until you show them black on white, this actual halacha brought you evidence. But that a yichud which is not a full yichud is still kind of by a psula, whereas by almana requires a complete yichud. In that case, then, if there was a yichud that will be made on Friday, it's mutter to then live with the almana on Friday night, because the kinyan was already made on Friday afternoon. We should be zecher to be kaya mitzvahs, shmiras Shabbos kilchosa, kol brazer, the gam should be zecher that to the Shabbos shalos lovay. Yes, God, tzadik made of me. Look at Shabbos. You're not allowed to move something on the waters, a boat, or a raft, or a log, or even a small bit of wood, even a toothpick, to float something in the water is asur. Zayda, because a person might swim himself, and he might build a raft for himself. Also, Zayda, that he might build a raft. Therefore, it is asur to float anything on the water. Put something into water to float it is asur. This applies only to a river or a lake, but not to a keli. A person decides to float something in a bathtub, maybe he wants to play. There's no isa there, because we figure that no doubt, at least probably, he's not going to build a raft in a bathtub. However, just this too brings us back to a different halacha entirely. If you recall, you have something floating on top of a glass of milk or soda or drink or scotch, and you want to get rid of it, the Gemara says do not blow it away, because the more you blow at it, the more angry you make it. This little thing floating is loudly something that could do harm. So the thing is to simply drink without, if it's foam, then the Gemara says a person is sunk. There's no way you can battle foam, because foam of beer and so on, because no matter what you do, there is a penalty to pay for it. If you blow it, well, this can cause a certain type of illness, blow it away. If you drink it, this can make a person also sick. Obviously, it gives him a type of internal gas. And if a person pushes it aside with a spoon, it's a different type of illness than ours. So what must you do? You got to let the foam dissolve by itself. Use simethicone to burst the bubbles. He was thinking about Shabbos, floating something. So it's only in a river, but not in a keli. I mean, in a keli, there's no issue of floating. It is that you're allowed to remove or cut hairs on Shabbos. Cutting hairs, these are razors, is an avmalacha, shearing. Cutting hair or cutting nails, same thing. Now, cutting hairs, let's get clear what's meant by a full Shabbos. A person does something basic on Shabbos, penalty is skila. It means, of course, but the penalty is skila, a death penalty. And b'shegeg, he has to bring a korban chatas. He has to bring a korban b'shegeg. Now, that's only if he broke the Issa Deraisa, as is stated, the full Issa. If not the exact Issa, but what then? But a part of the Issa, not the whole shear, not the whole amount, but just part of it. For example, let's say Yom Kippur, you're not supposed to eat for service. You're not supposed to eat a certain amount, no more than an hour. When you eat less than that, you're not breaking the law of Kodesh, but there is still an Issa Deraisa. And I'll tell you that a Chatzi shear is also. But on Shabbos too, there is a certain shear. For example, cutting 2 hairs on Shabbos, or plucking out 2 hairs on Shabbos is also in the Deraisa, but there's a skila, b'shegeg, a korban chatas. If he pulled out 1 hair on Shabbos, there is still an Issa Deraisa. But there is no skila of the nezid, there is no chatas b'shegeg. He pulled it out by accident on Shabbos, he forgot. He does not bring a korban chatas, and he pulled out only 1 hair. However, 1 nail, cut 1 nail on Shabbos, that is an Issa Deraisa, which is cited. Now, all this is said only if you use the keli, to use the tweezers to pull out the hair, or to use the scissors to cut the hair, or use the keli, a scissors or a nail cutter to cut the nails. And if he tore his nails with his fingers, or he pulled out the hair with his fingers, then there is no Issa Deraisa. Of course, it is still also, but it's midrabanan. Now, since we say that cutting nails is also midrabanan, with a keli, with hands midrabanan, what happens if the woman has to go to the mikveh on Friday night? She's supposed to prepare on Friday, she's supposed to cut her nails on Friday, be ready for mikveh on Friday night. What if she did everything, and it happens that they overlook? As it happens, the person overlooks 1 nail while cutting nails. And Friday before going to the mikveh, she found that she overlooked a nail. Or, let's say in general, because of the rush on Friday afternoon, everything was done except that the nails slipped her mind. She forgot to cut the nails. At night, as they go to the mikveh, sees the nails, that's a chatzitza, separation between the mikveh, between the fingers and the mikveh, which means that the mikveh will not have any effect. What is the incident? Incident is that it is permissible through a goy. To let a goy do it with his hands. It's possible with the fingers to have sharp nails, tear off the nails. This may not be smooth. You can always file it down with soy Shabbos. At least mitzvah to go to the mikveh that night. Why? Because a goy is an Issa Derabanan, it's a shvus. To do it with hands, it's also Issa Derabanan. It's called a shvus, the shvus. And the Rabbanan, Ave Rabbanan. And the shvus is not the mitzvah, like goes in Rabbanan. Who said this is also? Who said you're not allowed to tell a goy to do malacha on Shabbos? Who said you're not allowed to tear off nails with your hands? Rabbanan said it. These Rabbanan said, we did not say it in case there's a mitzvah involved if there is a double shvus, the shvus to shvus. Therefore, it's permissible in that case to get a guy to cut the nails off, tear the nails off with his hands. If it's impossible, literally impossible, you get a guy to the shvus, he will tear the fingers off something. In that case, then it's permissible, that's specific already, permissible to have a guy cut the nails off with a scissors or a nail clipper. And if there is no guy, can't find a guy, you cannot get a guy to do that kind of work, what is the Eitzadam? Should she then wait for Mitzvah Shabbos to go to the mikveh, or is there another Eitzadam? It then says that originally the din of cutting nails very Isur Hamel, because of the Gezeda that there might be a little bit dirt under the nails, which is a chatzitza. Therefore the Aharon made a Gezeda b'chlal. There's a nail there, it's a chatzitza, and no matter what there is, even the cleanest nail, and it's a chatzitza, the mikveh does not take effect. In this case, though, also the extreme mitzvah nail tefillah, with a woman they go to mikveh, plus it's Friday night, therefore, Aharon Rav that she should clean the nails very thoroughly, extremely thoroughly, with a sharp point, and that way there will be no chatzitza. There will definitely be no dirt whatsoever under the nails, only the shadow of the gezeda. Why she didn't cut the nails, since that's impossible for her to rectify it now, Aharon will allow it. But this is done only in very serious circumstances. Now, all this we said about cutting hair, two hairs is the nicer chiyuv of two hairs. The chiyuv skila mishmezid from chatas k'shegeg. One hair is also the nicer as a chatzi shir. He does not have any penalty. Mezid of a shegeg, he does only have for a shir, but there is an East nicer brother one I'll tell you. This is only if he doesn't select any special hairs. Cuts two hairs, he's higher. Or one hair, he's a nicer. What if he is beginning to turn gray? His hair is beginning to turn white. And he decides to cut or pluck a white hair. A white hair, to show he wants to look younger, so he pulls out, plucks a white hair. And, of course, he is malake, he's selecting one, he's chayiv even for one single hair. He pulls out one hair on Shabbos, a white hair among black ones, he's chayiv from chatas b'shegeg even for one single hair. This din is so strict that he's chayiv Malchus, 39 lashes, if he does it in the middle of the week. How strict this din is. And this is a very important lesson for men to know. Men who are growing older and are hungry goyim middle, or out there. It doesn't bother us. But among Jews, there are many Jews who are not aware of this din. One looks like you see ones who break this law, very common. You're not allowed to pick out one white hair and one black, and surely not many. The person is not allowed to pull out his white hairs. Pluck out the white hairs to look younger. Why? Because this is an Isur Minateda, Yilvash Geva Simlas Isha. This is the category of a woman that does that. This is a cosmetic type of action. It's reserved only for women, and a man who does that is breaking this din. Isur Lav. So you cannot pluck out white hairs. In addition, what's even more common, it's the same Isur, it says there is a man who dyes his hair. A certain type of shampoos that dye the hair, darken the color of the hair, darken it or dye it black. And this is an Isur D'Naisa, Yilash Kever. A man is not allowed to use any kind of a hair dye or a shampoo that will darken the gray or the white hairs. He's got to avoid any of this type of cosmetic action that's reserved for women, because recently much Kever. That way, this means that he can never touch his hair, specifically to pick out the white or to correct the whitening of the hair. That's during the week too. On Shabbos, as we said, doing that with one single hair, it's more Isa Chamor than cutting hair. Cutting hair takes two hairs. Collecting, tearing out a white hair, even one single hair is chayiv mid'oraisa. Which is therefore to see the alvona, the whitening, the shemayim, the chasadim overpower the dinim. These chasadim should bring us to the simcha folius of the Shmidas Shabbos, Shalos Lovay. Shabbos, Yom Shekulei Shabbos. This we should see with our eyes through the coming of Mashiach Tikuney and the Gesmita Shabbos. Shabbos, as is known, there are 39 malachos, 39 different types of acts that are forbidden. These acts are taken from, we learned them from the Beis Hamikdash. Malachos that were done in the Beis Hamikdash are ones that are asur on Shabbos. Don't catch you why one is an easy work and one is not, or something which is very heavy work, and yet it's permissible on Shabbos. Moving a heavy piano is permitted on Shabbos because it's not one of these 39 acts. If you need the space for it, of course. Otherwise it's muktzah. One of the Momentous Malachos is the Malacha of Geziza. Geza is to shear wool. Shearing wool, it means, of course, he uses shears, scissors. This Isser of shearing wool for the scissors refers to not just the living animal. You shear the wool. The wool, of course, is attached to the hide, felt, the skin of the animal. You shear the wool from the animal. It does not make any difference at all whether the animal is alive or it is dead. The same din of cutting with the scissors, shearing this wool applies. In other words, the chiyuv. Chayiv means not just mid'oraisa, but it's also a chiyuv skila of mezid or chatas b'shegig. And of course means you're using a keli, shears. If a person pulls the wool, pulls a piece of wool off an animal, then it is asur. The animal is alive. Customarily, normally you shear it. You pull a bit of wool off a live animal, that is asur midirabbanan. So there is no chiyuv. If, however, the animal is dead, once the animal is dead, then is a chiyuv, he's chayiv even if he rips the wool off him. Which means then that a person wearing a fur coat, it's a natural fur, not a synthetic. A person wearing a fur coat, and he plucks bits of fur off that coat on Shabbos, chas v'shalom, that's Isser of Gezes. 100% Isser of Gezes. And of course, we say that if the animal is alive, then there's no Isser Gezes. It's asur midirabbanan, not mid'oraisa at all. There's a case, though, where it's asur even mid'oraisa, and that's by a bird. To pluck feathers from a bird while it's alive is asur mid'oraisa. Aside from the fact that's on Shabbos, aside from the fact that on the weekdays too we have that Isser of Tzabelei Chayim. You're not allowed to torture a living thing, bird by plucking its feathers. But if it's done on Shabbos, plucking feathers is asur, just as shearing wool is worse than plucking wool off an animal. Now the same thing applies to a human being. A person who has a wart or some kind of a growth, and if he pulls it off on Shabbos, then he's chayiv. There's Isser on Shabbos, and he pulls it off on Shabbos. Isser av gezes is also removing part of something which is attached to the skin. Just as wool is attached to the skin and felt of an animal, to the hide, so too a growth attached to the skin is usher if he removes it. But that midaraisa, it's usher only if the item is damp, it's not dried out. In other words, it's still a live part of the skin. And also, if he uses an article, an instrument, scissors or a knife, then he's chayav for gozes. Of course, naturally we're speaking about a case where he doesn't draw blood. If he draws blood, there's a different isur and tzadik. Not drawing blood, if he removes and cuts off part of this growth, he's chayav as gozes. If the growth is dried out completely, and tears it off with his hand instead of with an instrument, then it's usur only with rabbanan. When would this apply normally, commonly? This would apply if a person has bits of skin, hanging skin near the nail, for example, or a dried out piece of skin from a scab. That which is attached to the skin, and he pulls that off, that's usur on Shabbos. At least, dried that's usur with rabbanan. If it's still a live skin, usur with raisa. That person must be very careful about even scratching the itch, because he might pull off some skin. These in general are the dinim of geizes. We should be zeichet to rekayim all these mitzvahs with tachlis and shleimus, thereby be zeichet to shiyam shekol Shabbos, assuming Yerushalmi and Mechela B'chei Shabbos. There are two malachos in Shabbos that practically go together. One is kaisev, writing, and one is mechek, erasing. The same rule applies to both. Kaisev, writing, requires, in order to be chayav, we say chayav always, we're speaking about chayav skila, amazed, and chayav ekov l'chatas b'shegim. There's a case where it's osam midaraisa too, but there's no skila, amazed, and no chatas b'shegim. The case where it's potter midaraisa, potter means he is free of penalty, but osur midrabanan. In this case of mutter, the Gemara says these terms you must remember always. Chayav, the word chayav is used always only when it's midraisa, not later. You'll never find the word chayav midrabanan. Midrabanan we find the word osur. Or you'll find potter, aval osur. The opposite of chayav is potter. Midraisa, he's not chayav, he's potter. Aval, but the rabbanan placed an isur on it, so it's potter and aval osur. When it is either midraisa, no midrabanan, there's no chiyuv, no isur, then it's called mutter. However, here midraisa, there are two cases. Chayav means chayav skila or chatas. There's also an isur midraisa. There's osur midraisa, but not chayav. That is usually the case where there is achos mikashir, less than a shear. For example, how we discussed previously about shearing the wool of an animal. In that case, in order to be chayav, it's chayav ekov chatas, then it requires to shearing the wool a thread that is 12 inches or 16 inches long. Shadow of length, 12 or 16 inches. Less than that, let's say that it's less than, of course that's according to the number of Rashid. Hashik is exactly half. First we'll have, let's say, 6 to 8 inches is chayav. Less than that, let's say even international, it's only 5 inches, then it's potter. There's no isur, there's no chiyuv skila, there's no chiyuv chatas, but there is still an isur midraisa. Yes, it is therefore chatzi shir osur midraisa. If Torah says something is forbidden, then it's forbidden no matter what amount is done or what amount is used. It's only that the penalty given is if the shear is done. So now we come to writing. they say, or mechek, or erasing, or for the same. Shia there was higher than kol chatos. You want to usually use the word again, another bit of information. You say higher, you said, Nezid is higher skila, Shegig is higher than kol chatos. The Gemara generally, practically always, uses the word higher than kol chatos. Higher chatos. Which of course, clearly shows, indicates, Nezid is higher skila. But we use the lighter term for two reasons. We don't want to say something that harsh, the word higher skila. Secondly, we don't want to show that a Jew ever does something for Nezid. A Jew does ever break the Shabbos Chas Shalom, it's Meshegi, so it's higher than Kol Chatos. So therefore we use the word higher Chatos, it is understood. For Nezid it would have been skila. Now, if a person writes or erases, shear, which is higher than chatos, is two letters, two aces. These two aces make no difference whether they are two aces of the same word. Make up two aces. A person can write two aces. Say if he writes two gimels. Gimel is two letters, but it makes up a word. The word gag is Aruch. Or he writes two zayins. So it means to move. Two cheseds also have a meaning. Cheseds are going to be the word. Let's say if he writes two samachs, two ayins, there's no meaning to that word. No meaning at all. It makes no meaning, but he has written two letters. That's what counts. Even though there were two letters, even though both are the same, I'm not going to say like the same one long letter or no word. It's higher for writing, but the same token is higher for erasing. So if he erases two letters, like the case of Mechek first, if he erases two letters, he's higher than Kol Chatos. If he erases one letter, it's still Osem Medaisem. One letter is still an Isur Medaisem. There is a stipulation, though, a condition. A person who erases just for the sake of erasing alone, not chayav at all. Osem Medaisem. It must be the condition. Kavona must be in order to write. Lichik of nas lichto. It's erasing for the sake of writing. And this which refers to all cases of destroying or doing away with. A person who destroys a building, takes a whole building. One builds, erects a building, and one destroys a building. One can be higher. Or one can be higher, or one can be potter. Because it is the binyan that counts, not the stira. It's not the destroying. If a person builds, it's higher. If a person destroys, he's not higher unless his kavona is for the sake of building. A person says, I'm going to destroy this building, he doesn't. I'm going to build a much nicer one on this spot. So destroying that building is considered a binyan. That's considered an act of binyan because it's seser amanas lefes. If a person erases, but he's destroying something. So what does he gain? What does he benefit by? What kind of halacha is that? It's only if he erases in a condition to write there. Right, or to correct that spot. Then he's chayav if he writes two aces, or also with one single ace. If he erases for the sake of cleaning the spot, that too is sakin. Erasing for the sake of cleaning. So therefore, if there is wax or ink spot, and he cleans it off, it's chayav. He wants to be able to, that is, if it's for the sake of cleaning it off, for the sake of not writing, but for the sake of a writing. For example, let's say that there's a paper, cloth, parchment with letters on it. On that letter is some wax drips. He wants to be able to read that letters, moves the wax. Not taking any letters, but erasing it, just taking the wax off. Not taking off the wax, also because it's for the sake of reading. This problem comes up many times in the Sefer Torah. You read a Sefer Torah, you find many times wax on the wax is used. Sefer for different reasons. cleaning cloths on, has wax attach itself to the sefer on top of the letters. What do you do on Shabbos? So it says that Shabbos, if you take off the wax in order to read the letters, you're breaking the still a Shabbos. What you have to do in a case like that is either if the wax is transparent, and you're allowed to leave the wax on it and read through the wax. It's very difficult to read. You can still better to read the letter by heart if there's no other sefer than to remove the wax. Removing the wax is also under all conditions because that would be lichek. Let's sing briefly. Minimum. In case writing it much more complex like that. Shabbos the cost of the emes. Singing it looks like a Shabbos. The same Isra of Mechek in a case save Mechek, writing or erasing. Erasing means destroying. It's not just you have to erase two letters. But if you take two letters made of metal and you break them, that's erasing also. Destroying two letters is the Isra Mechek. Therefore, there's a shayla to have cookies that are baked with letters on them, or chocolate. Chocolate, of course, means hard chocolate. You do not eat any milchiks on Shabbos. Any kind of food which has letters on it, birthday cake, happy birthday, have letters. Cut that cake, break those cookies, you are breaking, you are destroying, you are erasing letters. This says a person must be very careful to beware not to break, not to eat, not to use a cake like this. In fact, this says that this does not apply only to letters. The same thing would apply to figures also. You have figures on a cake. When you break those figures, case of Sforim, a lot of times you find Sforim when the sefer is closed on the outside, on the pages, the rim of the pages you have printed. The publishing company or words like that, so that when you open the sefer, you're breaking the letters. It's like erasing. You close the sefer, you're forming the letters. The question is this considered writing and erasing, or is it not? R Avraham says that please will place him that it is also to open such a sefer, or to close it if it is open. Otherwise, this kind of a sefer cannot be used on Shabbos at all because it is considered Tesev or Mechek, writing and erasing. Taz says this is permissible because writing and erasing is no different than building and destroying. When you put up a building, and that's the Isra of Bina. You break it, it's destroying. You put up a wall, that's building. You break the wall, it's destroying. If you have already a finished wall, and you break a hole in the wall, that should be also because of destroying. And yet, you have a finished wall, it's smooth. Pull a handle, a door opens up, and now the wall is broken. There's an opening in that wall, enough for you to go through. That's not considered breaking. Close the door, it's not considered building. Why? Because that's the nature of Dakadakach. It's the nature of this wall. The door is made to be open and closed. Same thing too with this sefer. The sefer is made to be open and closed, regardless of the print. You're not writing and erasing. That's the nature of the sefer. It's made that way. Therefore, the Taz says that it is permissible to use a sefer where there is printing on the outside of the pages. Most Acharonim concur with the Taz. They agree. The Shulchan says that, therefore, if he has only one sefer, he has no alternative, then it is permissible to use that sefer. If there are two svarim, one with printing and one without, why go into this machlekes? Might as well follow Magen Avraham is eating too. If the answer you won't say for there are many places in Achronim you can rely on the chatchila to use that sefer.